They say you should see the signs, the missed meetings, the vague compliments that feel more like eulogies, the sudden shift in the air when your name is brought up in a conversation you've just walked into. Looking back, maybe I did see them. Or maybe, when you've poured 15 years of your life, your heart, and your soul into building something, you choose to ignore the tremors before the earthquake. You convince yourself it's just the wind, because you can't bear the thought of the foundations cracking beneath your feet. Not like this. It started, as so many corporate endings do, with a calendar invite. It arrived at 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. The subject line was stark: strategic session. The description was even more barren: mandatory attendance. There was no agenda, no list of attendees I recognized, and the sender was an administrative assistant I'd never heard of. It was the kind of vague, sterile formality that had become the calling card of our new CEO, Gavin Sterling. He had swept, in 6 months prior, with a dazzling smile and a vocabulary composed almost entirely of business jargon. His favorite word was agility. He tossed it around in every quarterly update like confetti, his eyes gleaming with a polished, insincere fire. But we who had been there from the beginning knew what agility really meant. It meant restructuring. It meant consultants with expensive shoes and empty buzzwords. It meant a constant low-grade chaos cleverly hidden beneath pastel-colored PowerPoint decks and promises of a synergistic future. I had built this company. Or, at the very least, I had built the part of it that actually worked. When I was hired, Horizon Dynamics was a 4-person operation crammed into a shared office space that always smelled faintly of burnt coffee. I was the one who wrote the first vendor protocol from scratch. I was the one who negotiated and signed our initial logistics contract, securing terms that saved us from bankruptcy in that first fragile year. I was the one who stayed late, night after lonely night, updating our archaic systems while everyone else went home to their families. I personally trained 3 generations of operations teams, single-handedly navigated the crisis negotiations when our primary manufacturer in Malaysia unexpectedly shut down in 2013. And I never once asked for a title bump or a corner office. I didn't think I needed one. My work was my title. My results were my office. My legacy was the smooth, humming engine of the company itself. Until that morning, I thought that was enough. The meeting was scheduled in Conference Room 3B. That detail alone was a blaring alarm bell I chose to mute. Major strategy discussions, the ones that actually mattered, always happened in the glass-walled boardroom on the top floor, the one with the panoramic skyline view and the fancy cappuccino. Machine that never worked? Conference Room 3B was different. It was tucked away in the building's older wing, a place where forgotten projects went to die. No windows, one long, scratched mahogany table, and a faint, sad scent of old carpet shampoo. My heels clicked too, loudly on the worn tile as I walked in, a sharp, intrusive sound in the heavy silence. No one looked up. Well, almost no one. One person did. He was a young man, mid-20s at most, maybe 26. He sat with his back perfectly straight, arms folded across his chest as if he were already bored of a meeting that hadn't even started. He radiated a smug, unearned confidence, the kind of person who assumed every door would swing open for him simply because he'd deigned to approach it. I'd seen him around the office, a shadow trailing the CEO, but we had never spoken. He wore a designer watch that cost more than my first car. He nodded at me, a quick, dismissive dip of his chin. There was no smile, no introduction. Beside him sat Gavin Sterling, wearing that same rehearsed grin, dressed as if he'd just stepped off the stage of a leadership seminar. To his left was Diane from HR, her lips pressed into a thin, tight line. She was clutching a tablet to her chest like a shield and steadfastly refused to look up from it. "Eleanor," Gavin said, his voice offensively bright. He gestured to the empty chair directly across from him. "Glad you could join us." The chair was cold. It felt like it had been waiting for me. "We'll keep this short," he began, his voice as smooth and frictionless as polished glass. "As part of our strategic realignment toward a more forward-looking, agile business model, we've made the difficult but necessary decision to restructure the operations division." I blinked once. My heart had started a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. No one else in the room moved a muscle. "To be frank," he continued, leaning forward slightly, as if sharing a great secret, "we're looking to bring in younger, more agile talent, individuals who represent the future of this company, not just its past. It's not personal, Eleanor. You've been a foundational part of Horizon Dynamics, but the time has come for new leadership to take the reins." There it was. He said it like he was giving me a compliment, like I should be honored to be spoken of in the past tense, a relic to be admired before being placed in storage. The young man, who still hadn't uttered a word, shifted slightly in his seat, a subtle movement of preparation. Gavin gestured toward him. "This is Caleb. He'll be assuming your responsibilities, effective immediately." Caleb. The name clicked into place with a sickening finality. Caleb Sterling, the CEO's nephew. A recent business school graduate whose entire professional experience consisted of shadowing his uncle for a summer. He was now replacing me, a woman who had worked through holidays, through illnesses, through family losses, to keep this company from crumbling. I didn't say a word. There were no words that could fill the cavern that had just opened up inside me. I stood up, slowly, deliberately. I pulled every ounce of composure I had from the depths of my being and wrapped it around myself like armor. I nodded once, a mirror of the gesture Caleb had given me. Diane, the HR representative, still hadn't looked up from her tablet. Gavin's practiced smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Perhaps he expected a protest, tears, a desperate plea. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. I wouldn't cry in that soulless, windowless room. I wouldn't ask why. I wouldn't give them a single scrap of my pain to witness. I walked out of conference room 3B with my head held high. But inside, I was unraveling. Every nerve ending felt raw. Every breath was a struggle. The world I had known for 15 years had just been reduced to ash. When I got back to my office, the door was already locked. My keycard was useless. Sitting on the floor outside was a stack of banker's boxes, neatly labeled with my name in a stranger's handwriting. Someone had prepped for this. They had packed up my life while I was being erased. My hands shook as I bent down and opened the top box. Right on top was my framed team photo from the 2019 holiday party. The version of me in that picture, smiling, hopeful, blissfully unaware, felt like a ghost from another life. As I carried the first box toward the elevator, a silent parade of one, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. An unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it, to let the world go away. But something, a flicker of defiance perhaps, made me answer. "Eleanor Vance?" a voice asked. It was calm, measured, and deeply professional. "Yes," I said, my own voice sounding tired and distant to my ears. "This is Julian Croft," the voice said. The name hit me like a splash of cold water. Julian Croft was the CEO of Apex Dynamics, our biggest and most formidable competitor. As far as I knew, he had never acknowledged my existence beyond a brief nod at an industry panel 5 years ago. My breath caught in my throat. "Mr. Croft," I said, my posture instinctively stiffening. I didn't expect." I heard what happened. He cut in, his tone gentle but direct. "Horizon Dynamics made a mistake today, Eleanor. A monumental one. But I want you to know something." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. "Your work hasn't gone unnoticed. Not by me. I've been watching you for years." Chest, which had felt hollow and tight, suddenly felt a surge of something other than pain. His tone wasn't pitying. It was deliberate, assured, and calculating. "I'd like to meet," he continued, "somewhere quiet. Nothing formal, just a conversation." I swallowed hard, the dry click audible in the sudden silence of the hallway. I knew that kind of invitation. In this world, nothing was just a conversation. "You offering me a job?" I asked, my voice quieter than I expected, a fragile thread of hope. He chuckled, a low, warm sound that felt strangely reassuring. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But I have a feeling this may be the start of something much bigger than a simple job offer. You're not just a name on a personnel list to me, Eleanor. You're a mind I respect. You're a force they just foolishly unleashed." The silence between us stretched for a moment, but it wasn't awkward. It was electric, humming with unspoken possibilities, a promise not yet fully formed. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could hear the city around me again. The distant hum of traffic, the whisper of the wind brushing past the tall glass buildings. The pulse of a life I had forgotten existed outside the corporate walls I'd just been exiled from. "Where should we meet?" I asked. And just like that, a new chapter began, not with a whimper, but with a spark. The cafe was a discreet gem tucked away in a quiet corner of downtown. All glass walls, warm lighting, and the soft, respectful murmur of hushed conversations. It was the kind of place you went when you didn't want to be seen, but absolutely needed to be heard. Julian Croft was already there when I arrived, seated at a secluded corner table. He stood as I approached, extending a hand that was both firm and welcoming. His presence was magnetic, not flashy or loud, but commanding, like a man who understood the immense power of silence and the strategic value of precise timing. "Eleanor," he said simply, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention. He motioned to the seat across from him. We exchanged a few pleasantries, ordering coffee and making brief remarks about the unseasonably cool weather. It was the kind of small talk that served as a delicate veil for the tension humming just beneath the surface. Then, without any ceremony, he slid a slim black folder across the polished table. "Open it," he said. My fingers felt steady as I flipped the cover. Inside wasn't a job description. It was a plan, a meticulously detailed multi-phase acquisition strategy. Apex Dynamics intended to purchase Horizon Dynamics within the next fiscal quarter. Every line, every footnote, every legal contingency had been considered and accounted for. It was aggressive, brilliant, and ruthless. But that wasn't what stole my breath. At the very end of the document, under the section titled Leadership Transition Provisions, was my name. Not as a consultant, not as a director. The words were stark and clear. Eleanor Vance, Interim Chief Executive Officer. I stared at the words, then back at him, my mind racing to catch up. "This isn't just a job offer," I said slowly, the statement hanging in the air between us. "No," Julian agreed, his eyes holding mine. "It's a stage. It's the stage for everything they never let you build. They owned the theater, but you, Eleanor, wrote the play." My heart, which had been a dull ache for days, was now racing with a wild, unfamiliar energy. "They don't know yet, do they?" I asked, a whisper of conspiracy in my voice. "Not yet," he replied, a faint, confident smile touching his lips. "And when they do, it will be far too late for them to stop it." The implications buzzed in my head, a dizzying swarm of possibilities. Me stepping back into the halls of Horizon Dynamics, not as a disgraced employee, but as the incoming executive representing their soon-to-be parent company. Me holding the future of Gavin and Caleb Sterling in my hands. The idea was as surreal as it was intoxicating. But another question surfaced, stubborn and sharp. "How did you know?" I asked, my voice regaining its strength. "About my firing, about all of this, so quickly?" Julian leaned back, his expression unreadable, a masterful poker face. Information moves fast when people respect the source, he said, his voice dropping slightly. I have people who monitor talent shifts in the industry. Your name dropping off Horizon's internal roster was a seismic event for those who know where to look. I simply made some calls. There was something else in his voice, something that went beyond business. It felt personal. You've been watching. Me? I said, the words more of a realization than a question. He met my gaze directly, without pretense. You built the entire operational backbone of that company. You created the only part of it that was worth saving. I've known that for years. Now, it's your chance to prove it to everyone else. I closed the folder and sat back, the cool leather of the chair a grounding sensation. The cafe felt warmer somehow, the world outside quieter. Or maybe, for the first time in a long, long while, I wasn't drowning in the noise of someone else's agenda. I'll need some time, I said, my voice steady and clear. You have until the end of the week, Julian replied. He stood, left a generous tip on the table, and paused for a moment before walking away. When you're ready, Eleanor, he said, his final words hanging in the air like a mission statement. Don't just walk back through that door. Own it. I watched him go, a titan of industry disappearing into the afternoon crowd. My fingertips rested on the black folder, a tangible symbol of a future I hadn't dared to imagine just hours before. And for the first time since I had walked out of Horizon Dynamics, I didn't feel broken. I felt powerful. That night, sleep was a forgotten country. I lay on my couch, the folder open on the coffee table, the shifting shadows from the streetlights outside dancing across the floor. I thought about power, about revenge, about the intoxicating idea of rebirth. And then, like a flicker of lightning in a dark room, I remembered something. A line. A paragraph. A single clause I had drafted almost as an afterthought years ago, during a tedious period of governance cleanup when I was briefly brought into board-level strategy sessions. It had seemed so insignificant at the time, a piece of bureaucratic lint. But now, it was everything. Article 7, Section C. It stated, any former board-level contributor or senior project lead maintains a 90-day right to oversight and advisory access in the event of a pending acquisition or merger, effective from the last recorded date of service. It had been one of those dense, legalistic footnotes that no one ever argues about, because no one believes it will ever matter. I remembered inserting it myself, almost unchallenged, while revising a thick stack of corporate policies. The senior leadership team, including Gavin's predecessor, had skimmed right past it. The legal department had nodded it through. No one had ever imagined that someone like me, an operational architect, not a politician, might one day have a reason to use it. After I was let go, they probably assumed it had been purged along with all the other digital documents tied to my name. But they were wrong. At 2:13 a.m., with a surge of adrenaline, I powered up an old external hard drive I hadn't touched in years. My hands were shaking, just a little, as I navigated through a labyrinth of forgotten folders, backup files, policy drafts, dated internal memos. And then I saw it. The file name was innocuous. Horizon Governance, Rev Y8 Final PDF. I clicked. It opened. My breath hitched. There, on page 46, was Article 7, Section C, clear, direct, and still bearing my digital edits, my track changes, my signature. Unmodified, valid, legally binding. I leaned back, my heart pounding a slow, powerful rhythm against my ribs. The full weight of it settled into my chest. Horizon Dynamics thought they had erased me. They thought they could rewrite history, replace 15 years of dedicated service with a smiling puppet, and move on without a single consequence. But they missed something. They missed this. I still had oversight, not just symbolically, but legally. For the next 90 days, calculated from my last board-attached project. I had a right to access internal data, meeting transcripts, and transition plans. I had a right to be in the room, to see everything, to ask questions, and I wasn't going to tell a single soul. Because when Apex Dynamics made its move and Horizon scrambled to hold their footing, I'd be holding the card they thought they had burned. Sometimes, true power isn't about raising your voice. Sometimes it's about knowing exactly when to stay silent and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And I realized with a chilling certainty, could wait. It began not with a thunderclap, but with a whisper. An email, just one, sent at 6:42 a.m. the next morning. The subject line was simple. Let's talk. I sent it to Priya Sharma, the former director of product integration. She'd been realigned out of the company 2 years ago, another victim of corporate euphemism. Priya had built half of the user interface systems that Horizon still relied on. Her reply came in 8 minutes. When and where? Next was Marcus Doyle, the quiet genius who had single-handedly kept our logistics flow alive during the 2017 supply chain freeze. He had been made the scapegoat when a third-party vendor failed, a situation entirely out of his control. Then came David Chen, who had redesigned our entire customer success framework, and even gruff, sarcastic Will Hobbs, who once told me, the only things holding the company together were duct tape and people like you. One by one, the old guard responded. We met quietly, in neutral spaces that held no ghosts of our past lives. Anonymous cafes, rented co-working lounges, even an old wine bar in the financial district where no one cared who was whispering secrets in the corner booth. They remembered me. More importantly, they remembered the truth. They knew who had actually built the processes, who had led through the crises, and who had quietly held the company together, while others soaked up the spotlight and took the credit. I knew something was rotten the moment I heard your name was gone, Priya said, stirring her tea, her gaze sharp. They've always been afraid of competence there. It exposes them. I nodded, listening, absorbing not just their words but their energy. There was a charge in the air around us, like dry static, before a storm. While we reconnected, I laid the groundwork. I quietly worked with a legal consultant recommended by Julian's team, refining my understanding of Article 7, Section C, and preparing to file the official notices of my oversight rights when the time was right. I traced access points to Horizon's shared legal repository, cross-verified the timeline for the merger preparation materials, and began drawing a digital map of the company's internal transition pathways. I wasn't just watching anymore. I was building an insurgency. The transfer of power wouldn't come with trumpets and declarations. It would happen the way real power shifts always do, silently and all at once. They would wake up one morning, thinking they still held the reins, and realize, too late, that the hands guiding the horse were no longer theirs. The old guard was waking up, and I was leading them home. 2 days later, a secure document appeared in my inbox, sent by one of Julian Croft's senior operations team members. It was exactly what I'd been waiting for. A full, unredacted list of Horizon Dynamics' current executive leadership. Names, titles, divisions, tenure, faces I once worked beside every day. Some I had mentored. Others I had tried to warn. I scanned the list slowly, and with every name, a memory sharpened, a piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Brenda Riley, once a junior analyst on my team, promoted twice in my final year. She had submitted a quiet but scathing peer review during my exit process, one I wasn't meant to see but had found buried deep in an archived HR file, citing my resistance to new paradigms. Then there was Ben Carter, the head of strategic partnerships. He had shaken my hand with a warm smile the week before I was let go, telling me how much he respected my work. He had then signed the internal petition calling for fresh operational leadership. They had all played their parts. They weren't actively malicious, not in a way you could easily pinpoint. They were simply complicit, climbers on the corporate ladder, all too willing to let someone else take the fall so they could get a better foothold. I opened a new encrypted file on my laptop and created 2 columns: retain and release. My fingers moved steadily, calmly, with a kind of surgical focus. There was no anger, no thirst for a bloody vendetta. There was only assessment, cold, clear, and absolute judgment. For each name, I wrote brief, incisive notes. Their contributions, their risks, their loyalties, or lack thereof. I wasn't just making a personnel chart. I was laying the foundation for a new regime. Because when the merger hit, and it would, hit fast, I needed to know with absolute certainty who was a pillar to be reinforced and who was a weed to be pulled. By the end of the day, the list was nearly complete. I saved the file with a single potent word: sovereign. I returned to Horizon, Dynamics on a gray Monday morning, walking through its sliding glass doors with a new badge clipped to my coat. It read, Eleanor Vance, Strategic Advisor. That's all it said. To everyone else, I was just another consultant, brought in to assist during a vague and undefined transitional period. No one asked who had arranged it. No one dared to question why I'd been given clearance to sit in on executive meetings. I walked past the gleaming reception desk, past the hallway where I had once poured out 15 years of my life, and not a single person stopped me. They didn't see me as a threat. They saw me as a ghost. Good. Let them underestimate me. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the executive floor. The walls were mirrored, polished to a flawless shine, just like the illusions they were so desperate to maintain. But I could already see the cracks starting to show. When the doors opened, I was greeted by an unnerving silence. Not the productive hum of a focused office, but the heavy, uneasy quiet of a ship taking on water. Phones rang unanswered. Small groups of people whispered in glass-walled meeting rooms, their faces etched with furrowed brows and white-knuckled, grips on their coffee mugs. I was escorted to a temporary office. It was small but well-appointed, with a desk, a monitor, and a decent view of the downtown skyline. They thought they were being generous, keeping me at arm's length but close enough to contribute. What they didn't realize was that they had given me a front-row seat to the chaos they had created, and chaos, I soon discovered, was putting it mildly. Customer support requests were going unanswered for days. A major logistics pipeline had broken down because someone, Caleb I would later learn, had failed to renew a critical software license. Sales leads were being fumbled with 2 different teams reaching out to the same high-value client, creating confusion and frustration. The quarterly roadmap presentation had been postponed 3 times because no one could explain why the projected numbers didn't match the grim reality of the Didi. At the center of this swirling vortex of incompetence stood Caleb Sterling, fresh-faced, overconfident, and dangerously out of his depth. He walked around the floor with a tablet and a permanent frown, delegating tasks wildly, asking questions that revealed a stunning lack of basic knowledge, and delivering rambling monologues about disruption to hide his crippling uncertainty. I watched him stumble through a stakeholder call, mispronouncing a key client's name and promising performance metrics we hadn't come close to hitting in months. Behind him, his hand-picked team of agile young talents was unraveling. Mid-level managers exchanged confused, desperate glances. Directors kept their heads down, terrified of being noticed and blamed for the next crisis. The mood in the office was brittle. It was fear, not respect, that held the fragile structure together. I said nothing. I simply observed. In one meeting, I watched Brenda Riley stammer through a status update while Caleb barked at her for figures she wasn't even responsible for. She caught my eye for a fraction of a second, a flicker of pained recognition, and then quickly looked away. In another, I watched Ben Carter artfully dodge questions about a broken vendor relationship that I knew. From my own records, he had personally mishandled. He smiled too much, laughed too loudly, and left the meeting before it was officially adjourned. No one seemed to know who was truly in charge anymore, which meant, in time, they would start looking around for someone who did. I kept a simple notepad on my desk. Nothing official, no labels. Just quick sketches, notes, arrows connecting names to projects, initiatives overlapping with failures. It was my own private intelligence log. I wasn't here to fix anything. Not yet. I was here to witness the collapse. The most dangerous person in any room is the one who says nothing while taking in everything. Let them flail. Let the seams rip wide open. The reckoning was coming. And when it did, they would finally realize the advisor wasn't just a visitor. She was the storm. It happened mid-afternoon, during one of those strange lull moments when the office buzz had turned from frantic chaos to weary confusion. I was reviewing the latest operations log when an email popped into my inbox. It had no subject, no header, just a long stream of forwarded threads from an overwhelmed junior analyst named Sarah Lynn. It wasn't meant for me, but the moment I saw the contents, I knew it had landed exactly where it needed to. Attached was a customer feedback summary, flagged as urgent in bright red letters. 3 major clients, long-standing, high-volume accounts, had expressed their direct refusal to continue projects led by Horizon's current head of SEO, Mark Jennings. Their words were blistering. Strategy is completely disconnected from market. Reality, delivered outdated models masked as innovation, refuses to adapt or listen to feedback, no longer aligned with our brand's forward-thinking goals. I scrolled further. A breakdown of performance metrics showed a steady, undeniable decline in organic traffic, lead conversion, and keyword relevancy. Mark had been boasting about his impressive numbers in recent leadership meetings, but these emails proved his numbers were paper-thin, decorative metrics, all flash and no foundation. He had been a peer of mine once. Not brilliant, but bold and ruthlessly ambitious. When I left, he had been among the most vocal public supporters of the realignment. I remembered his digital signature at the bottom of the internal endorsement letter that had circulated. But what struck me most wasn't just the decline itself. It was the deafening silence around it. No one seemed to be ringing the alarm bells. Either they were too afraid to challenge one of Caleb's chosen lieutenants, or they were too lost in their own departmental fires to notice another blaze starting across the hall. I spent the next hour backtracking through Sarah's forwarded thread, mapping the timeline of client dissatisfaction. This hadn't started last week. It had started months ago. There were ignored warnings, soft flags in previous reports, emails marked low priority that now read like chilling premonitions. The client who was most vocal in their disappointment was Solus Energy, a renewable energy tech firm we had fought incredibly hard to land 3 years prior. I remembered sitting across from their CEO, arguing the case for our ethical and scalable growth strategies. I remembered what it had taken to win their trust. Now they were on the verge of walking away. And Mark? He was still holding his weekly optimization briefings, like a general who hadn't noticed that half his troops had already defected. This wasn't about revenge. This was about consequence. The erosion of the company wasn't loud or cinematic. It was slow, silent, and deeply rooted in ego and incompetence. They had thrown away years of experience for optics. They had gambled the company's reputation on shortcuts and self-assured smiles. And now, the bill was coming due. I didn't forward the email. I didn't respond to Sarah. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way. Some collapses need to be felt, not just warned about. For now, I would let the cracks widen, because soon enough, the whole rotten structure would cave in on itself. It happened at precisely 9:01 a.m. on a Wednesday. The press release from Apex Dynamics was brief and clinical. It used standard formatting, the official company letterhead, and a single, devastating line that broke the office silence like a thunderclap. Apex Dynamics is pleased to announce the appointment of Eleanor Vance as Interim Chief Executive Officer of Horizon Dynamics, effective immediately, pending final acquisition. By 9:07 a.m., it had reached every inbox in the building. By 9:10 a.m., the internal Slack channels went eerily quiet. By 9:15 a.m., you could hear a pin drop on the executive floor. I arrived at exactly 9:30 a.m. I was dressed in a slate gray suit, my hair tied back, my expression unreadable. My badge still read advisor, but it was now merely a formality. Security had already been notified. My credentials had already been changed. Legal had already prepared the documents. There was no announcement made over the intercom. No grandee speech was given in the break room. No one needed to usher me in. I simply walked through the hallways, past the departments that had once been my home, past the whispers and the wide-eyed sideways glances. No one dared to speak. Some people stood motionless at their desks. Some just stared. Some bowed their heads, suddenly fascinated by their keyboards. The door to the CEO's office was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The decor had been changed since I was last in a room like this. There was modern abstract artwork on the walls, a massive gold-framed mirror, and a pretentious leather armchair in the corner meant to scream authority. And on the massive desk, Caleb's desk, a digital nameplate was still blinking with his credentials. I didn't hesitate. I walked to the desk, opened a drawer, and unplugged it. The screen went dark. The primary monitor booted to the login screen. I typed in my new credentials. E. Vance. Accepted. Within moments, the room was mine. Again. I didn't need applause. I didn't need validation. I just needed to get to work. One by one, I began removing items from the desk. Not dramatically, but strategically. The oversized ego-stroking trophies went first. The etched plaque that read, Next Gen Visionary. The bizarre glass sculpture that served no purpose other than to take up space. The branded notebooks filled with empty brainstorming jargon. Each one was placed gently in a cardboard box. There was no anger in my hands, only precision. In the bottom drawer, I found my old coffee mug. It had a faint crack in the handle, and it had somehow survived 15 years of early mornings and late nights. I placed it on the desk beside the monitor. It belonged here. The final piece was the framed motivational quote on the wall. Disruption breeds progress. I stared at it for a long moment, then pulled it down. Behind it, on the pale paint, was a faded pinhole and a faint outline of the photo I'd once hung there. Me and the old team. The ones who had stayed late, who had bled for deadlines, who had laughed through power outages and wept through layoffs. I smiled. A real one, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Then I opened my briefcase, removed the sleek black folder Julian had given me, and laid it on the desk. Inside were the plans for the next 90 days, and they belonged to me. The meetings began the following morning. One by one, I scheduled them. Private, 15-minute windows. Just enough time to hear the truth, or to confirm a person's commitment to silence. Every single employee who had remained at Horizon Dynamics when I was let go received an invitation. Some arrived fidgeting, their hands clasped tightly in their laps. Some came in smiling nervously, a desperate hope in their eyes. Others tried to appear confident, as if this seismic shift in power hadn't affected them at all. I greeted each one calmly. I didn't lecture. I didn't accuse. I asked only one question, phrased in slightly different ways. When it happened, why didn't you say anything? Some apologized immediately, their voices trembling with a remorse that seemed genuine. They admitted to fear, to the pressures of corporate politics, to a cowardice they had dressed up as professionalism. I should have said something, Eleanor. Brenda Riley whispered, her eyes avoiding mine. I knew it was wrong. I didn't know how to fight it. Others tried to justify their silence. They told convoluted stories about being caught off guard, or assuming there was a bigger plan they weren't privy to. I nodded, took my notes, but I made no promises. Apologies were only accepted when they came without a defense attached, and some didn't speak at all. They sat there, hands folded, their eyes as blank as a whitewashed wall, as if the moment simply hadn't arrived yet. I marked their names quietly on my list. With each meeting, I grew quieter inside. Not colder, but clearer. Every apology was a window into the true culture that had been allowed to fester. The excuses spoke far louder than the regrets. And then, my former assistant, Megan, walked in. She entered slowly, clutching her phone like a shield. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just emotionally dimmed, tired, hesitant. Her eyes flicked around the newly reordered office before finally settling on me. She sat across from me, and tears were already glistening in her eyes. I owe you more than an apology, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I owe you the truth. I said nothing. I waited. I was asked to watch you, she continued, the words spilling out in a rush. To report if you seemed resistant to the new direction. If you started asking too many questions. Gavin said it was standard protocol during a leadership transition. She paused, shaking her head, a tear finally breaking free and tracing a path down her cheek. But it wasn't. It was a betrayal, and I did it because I thought it would protect my job. I was scared. The silence between us was suffocating. Her voice dropped even lower. I hated every second of it. You were never cruel to me. You never dismissed me. You brought me into meetings when no one else would even acknowledge I was in the room. And I watched them dismantle you piece by piece, and I said nothing. I kept their schedules for them. I took the notes they asked for, and once, I even printed the HR memo announcing your removal. My chest tightened, a knot of old pain and new understanding. I won't be silent anymore, she said, finally looking me straight in the eye. Whatever you need, I'll do it. Not for redemption, but because you deserved better than that. We all did. I watched her closely, and I believed her. I believed her not because of her words, but because of her shame. Real shame doesn't posture or bargain. It pleads. It shows itself, raw and vulnerable, without demanding forgiveness in return. I stood, walked around the massive desk, and placed a hand on her shoulder. You don't owe me, Megan, I said softly. You owe the truth. Start there. She nodded, her breath catching in a sob of what sounded like relief. As she left my office, I noted something unexpected in her walk. Resolve. That's when I knew. Redemption. Might be rare, but it wasn't impossible. And just like that, the reckoning continued. Not loud, not dramatic. One face, one choice, one truth at a time. It was late afternoon when Mark Jennings walked in without being scheduled. He didn't knock. He didn't wait for an invitation. He entered the office as if he still possessed some residual power, as if he still expected the world to revolve around his voice. Eleanor, he said, flashing a practiced predatory smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. We haven't had a chance to catch up. A real shame, that. I remained seated, my hands resting on my desk. I've been thinking, he continued, stepping closer, his cologne invading my space. We're in a new chapter now, a new era for Horizon. I think we could make a great team, you and I. My insights, your leadership, real synergy. He said the word synergy as if it were a magic spell, as if it could convince me to forget the past, to ignore the file sitting on my desktop detailing his failures. I opened a drawer, pulled out a sealed, plain white envelope, and slid it across the polished wood toward him. He looked down at it, his smile faltering into a look of confusion. "What's this?" he asked. "Your termination," I said, my voice even and devoid of emotion. "Effective immediately." The silence in the room cracked. His face went through a rapid series of transformations, from confusion to disbelief to a dawning, horrified understanding. "You can't be serious," he stammered. I didn't blink. "Your performance has been a liability. Your client relationships are in tatters, and your strategy is built on sand. You've already assisted us by revealing your true nature. We're done here." He opened his mouth, perhaps to protest, to argue, to spin some new reality. But he thought better of it. The undeniable weight of his own consequences settled on his shoulders, and for the first time since I'd known him, Mark Jennings had no clever spin, no prepared defense. He picked up the envelope with a shaky hand and left without another word. No shouting, no theatrics, just quiet, irreversible consequences. I watched through the glass wall of my office as he walked down the hall, his shoulders stiff, his head slightly lowered. A few employees peeked out from their offices, uncertain of what had just happened but keenly aware that something fundamental had shifted. I turned my gaze to the window, to the city below, bathed in the warm, golden light of the setting sun. There was a strange calm in the air, like the brief, still breath between a flash of lightning and the roll of thunder. My fingers drummed lightly on the desk. Mark's removal wasn't about settling a personal score. It was about setting a standard. It was about restoring a company built on substance, not illusion. If I was going to rebuild Horizon Dynamics from the ground up, there could be no room for the rot that had been allowed to spread just beneath the polished surface. Every decision now mattered. Every move had to be deliberate and purposeful. There were more names on my list, more meetings to schedule, more changes to enact. But as the door clicked shut behind Mark, I allowed myself one brief moment of stillness. This wasn't vengeance. This was reclamation. In the weeks that followed, the office found a new rhythm. Some people adjusted willingly, relief evident in their posture. Others did so out of necessity, their survival instincts kicking in. But all of them, in ways big and small, felt the shift. I never raised my voice. I never made grand declarations or sweeping speeches in the break room. I simply showed up early, made decisive, data-driven decisions, and held people accountable for their work. I wasn't interested in praise or popularity. I was interested in the truth. One afternoon, I walked past the glass conference room where, just months ago, I had been forced to box up my life. That same room now held one of my strategy meetings, filled with a mix of the loyal old guard I had brought back and the promising talent who had survived the purge. A junior analyst I had mentored years ago, a young man named Kenji, stood outside the room, looking nervous. I paused beside him. "Something on your mind, Kenji?" I asked. He looked at me, then nodded slowly. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you stay so calm? Not let any of this get personal?" I offered a small, soft smile, but my eyes were resolute. "Oh, it's deeply personal," I corrected him gently. "But personal doesn't have to be messy. When you know your value, you don't need to argue. You just need to act." I turned to leave, then paused and looked back at him. "And one more thing," I added. "Never mistake silence for weakness. Sometimes it's just preparation." That night, long after the office lights had dimmed and the last elevator had hummed to a stop, I sat alone in the corner office. My office. I opened a clean page in my notebook and wrote a single line at the bottom. "Integrity is remembered longer than power." I closed the book, took a sip from my old cracked mug, and then I got back to work. The rebuilding had just begun.